Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the American composer and multi-instrumentalist. It is Jonathan Segel, who I spoke to very recently. He's played with Camper Van Beethoven, also Sparklehorse, Eugene, Chadbourne, and lots of others. So this is going to be the interview to find out more about Jonathan's life and his creative journey. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Jonathan, it's over to you.
So I was born in 1963, and the records that my parents had were just, Judy Collins and folk music and then things like that. So I started listening to the Beatles when I was really young. And I was really interested in the Beatles, from the age of 4 or 5 years old. And so, when my dad would be like, what are we going to do this weekend? I would be like, we're going to go to the record store and I need to get a new Beatles record, And also I had... I grew up in Davis, California, which is sort of Northern California. It's between San Francisco and Sacramento. A lot of good bands come from there, especially back then.
Yes.
I could list a few if you'd like.
Yes, list a few. What bands came?
For instance, Thin White Rope came from there. The Suspects came from there and then moved to L.A. and then became Dream Syndicate.
Oh, yes.
Game Theory, which, also was Loud Family, and... what else? There were some other bands I can't remember. But so at the time, we got an AM radio station from San Francisco called KFRC, in the late 60s. And they were playing what was popular at the time, which was like Jefferson Airplane and, all that kind of stuff. So I got a clock radio when I was little, and I started listening to that. And that really tuned me into the rock music thing. However, still listening to the Beatles and more sort of lighter rock sorts of things, Elton John, that sort of stuff. In the early 70s, my mom took a sabbatical position in Tucson, Arizona. And so we went down there in the early 70s for a year. And since I didn't know anybody, I would walk down 4th Avenue every afternoon after school and go to the record stores. And these guys were like, hey, kid, what are you listening to? Oh, the Beatles, Elton John, whatever, that sort of thing. And they'd be like, you ever heard Alice Cooper? You ever heard Led Zeppelin? This sort of stuff. So that was like a major, major thing for me, like moving into the world of, I guess, real heavy rock music, So that when I came back to Davis as a junior high schooler, 12-year-old, I started a band at that point, and we played rock, like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Stones, sort of stuff. Until about 1979, when I was, I guess, 16 years old, and the local college radio station was taken over by all these cool people that were in all these bands that I was just talking about, and they started playing all this stuff that was coming over from England. So I heard Young Marble Giants and things like that, Buzzcocks, of course, and the Jam and things like that. And that, again, really changed my ears a lot.
Yes, well, absolutely. God, that's quite... And your parents, were they both academics in university? So you had quite an interesting highbrow sort of conversation around the dinner table, didn't you?
Yeah. I mean, my mom is like, what do you think is the evolutionary advantage to music?
Yes.
Better,
Well, it must have been quite interesting. And were they quite progressive? Were they also quite interested in the counterculture of the 60s? Was that something that they were quite interested in, or did they just think...
they were more 50s, like beatniky, sort of that culture. My parents met in graduate school in Madison, Wisconsin. And at the time, seeing pictures of them, my dad was a total beatnik, with the goatee and painting and taking photographs, while studying biochemistry and that sort of stuff. So I think they were more into that sort of stuff and the great folk music scare, because we had all these old folk records.
Right. So like Woody Guthrie and people like that.
Yeah.
So they would have, and were they into the Beat generation like Jack Kerouac and?
It's really hard to say because, growing up, I felt like my parents were really straight. So it's like, it's unknown what happened before I came along or before I was conscious of what they might have been doing.
Yes. And did you have any brothers or sisters that gave you any direction?
I have a younger brother who's 2 years younger than me. And what was funny is that by the time in the late 70s or latter half of the 70s, when we were collecting records, both of us buying records all the time, we made an agreement so that, like, you get these bands, so I get these bands, so that we can, we don't have to buy the same records. Like, he'll buy the David Bowie and I'll buy what, I don't even remember what I was getting at the time, but
yes, but it must have been quite an interesting transition from that 60s period, because it did sort of end on such a downer, really, with the breakup of the Beatles and then the death of so many sort of iconic people like Hendrix, Morrison, Joplin. You had Charles Manson, so the whole world, and though Woodstock, the film, made the festival look lovely, it looked, from reports about it now, it was a complete disaster. It was like, and how the guy Michael, I can't remember his surname, I've got a book by him somewhere, was ever allowed to organise anything again was quite amazing until Woodstock 99, which obviously he really should have just packed it up and realised that he'd lucked out in 69. So it was quite interesting. But then the 70s, I mean, I spoke to a few people from that 60s, people like Barry Miles and even Joe Boyd, who would have produced people like the Incredible String Band and early Pink Floyd. I mean, he'd written his book White Bicycles on the 60s, and people go, what about the 70s? And it was like, actually, I just didn't exist in the 70s. So he's written another massive doorstop of a book about, music and stuff
about world music, right?
About world music, I know. And I've just got a copy, and I thought, oh my God, this is going to take quite a lot to get through before.
Yeah, I haven't seen the book yet, but I know about it. I've read about it. But
yes, but it was just interesting.
One of the things that's funny about that transition also is that television, especially in America, it was like it went from cops and robbers to cops like breaking up cults of hippies or like cult leaders like Manson sort of thing. These sorts of things, and drug use, all this all started to appear in the in all of the regular primetime cop shows. So it's like suddenly there was this whole consciousness of watch out, because your children may be brainwashed.
Yes, there could be. Don't touch the brown acid. Right. But then did you also have that kind of over the shadow of all this was Vietnam? Was that something that, your parents were kind of watching on the news thinking this is just not good?
I saw a lot of that stuff. I was very politically awakened by a lot of that because, seeing people, oh, this is your country's army, and we're playing with army men or G.I. Joe or whatever. And it's like, oh, my country's army men are over there killing all these people, women and children and God knows what. So I became, by the time I was 7 years old, I became very like politically anti-war and ecological sort of stuff. Like the whole eco movement started about then, and especially in California, with they had this theta design. It was like a green theta, a circle with a line through it, and there were flags with that, and that meant like ecology somehow. I don't know exactly what that was.
Right. So yes, I think was it a guy called Stuart Brand who?
Yeah, Stuart Brand. Who did the Whole Earth catalog. So we did have I had the Whole Earth catalog at home, and I would look through that when I was 6, 7, 8 years old.
Yes, and we're about to live off grid and all that kind of very exciting kind of stuff, which was always quite good.
I was so into it that by the time I was 12 or 13, I for summer break between school, I went up to Montana to go to survival training camps, where they teach you how to live off the land, literally, in a literal way. And I was really backpacking and stuff like that. And I'm sure that those guys that were, doing the bow and arrow elk hunting up there at the time and teaching kids how to survive, I'm sure they became militia,
But it's interesting, a few years, decades later, they had that other thing, which was in, I don't know if it was in Arizona, but Biosphere 2,
Yeah.
where they'd created this kind of, they wanted to see if these 8 people could survive for 2 years in Biosphere 2, which was just, I just watched, I visited there once many years ago and was fascinated, but then I watched the film over the weekend. And interestingly enough, a lot of the people who were part of that are all still living together in a community.
That's nice.
And it's a really nice story. But interestingly enough, it all goes slightly bad. Well, slightly, that's an understatement. When Steve Bannon appears in the scene. And there's a whole Steve Bannon part of that story of Biosphere too. So if you get a chance, I think it's on Amazon Prime now. So just as a curiosity of capturing a time of, yes, living off grid and, alternative community living.
I just, when I was in the U.S. Last month, I buy books because, I live in Sweden, and the English books that I find here are like either old paperbacks or just crap. So
Yes.
I always buy books when I'm back in the States. But I just bought a new T.C. Boyle book. And I was reading what he's been writing lately, and one of his recent books, like from about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, was about the Biosphere 2. It's like a sort of a fictionalized account, I think, of that.
Yes.
But it's about that situation.
Oh, well, it's absolutely fantastic because they were sort of a kind of an incredible group of people led by one person who was obviously quite charismatic. And they began as a kind of commune theatre group. And then he gets an idea that they should build a ship. And then they build a ship. And you're thinking, wow, this is quite amazing. And they go with it. And then it's like Biosphere 2, and that's all going well. And then Steve Bannon comes along and it's like all falls apart drastically. But now they all live quite happily together. It's sort of quite a lovely story, actually, if you get a chance. So
Definitely, that sounds very interesting.
Yes, dear old, yes. So that whole world. So then, when did a musical instrument sort of come into your consciousness?
I had started playing really early. It's like I was one of those kids that took piano lessons at 6 or played the recorder, block flute. The what do you call them in English? Recorder, right?
Just a recorder, I think. That was where
that was the first thing when you're like 4 years old, learning the fingering for that, and then piano, and then I started playing guitar when I was about 7. I started playing violin when I was 10.
Right, so you were very precocious at this stage, or keen,
and drawing little pictures of hair, like Cousin It sort of things, like hair, a top hat, and an electric guitar, and bat wings. These are like the characters that I drew when I was like 6 and 7 years old.
Right, sort of quite gothic.
Yeah, goth. It was. I mean, but the electric guitar was like a big part of it.
So, what was the first concert you went to, by the way?
I don't really know. On the university campus, Davis is an agricultural school. It's like the agricultural arm of Berkeley, or it was initially, and now it's more of a generalized. I mean, has a college VAG and has a College of Letters and Science. But every spring they have a festival called Picnic Day, and there are many bands that play. So I'm sure that it was some.
Yes. And did you were talking about sort of slightly the heavy rock scene with Led Zeppelin. Did you also get into people like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath? Yes. And then kind of cross? Did the prog world come over to America at all?
I was really into Yes when I was like a 15-year-old, 16-year-old.
Fantastic. What was your Yes album that you loved?
Relayer.
Relayer, okay. Yeah. I think I remember.
I liked the first couple, but then it's like Relayer and Tales from Topographic Oceans. It's funny because I think I remember now the first Yes album that I bought, it was Close to the Edge, and I just bought it because it looked interesting. I didn't know anything about the band. It was just at the record store and I was like, this looks pretty good.
Yes, but then you all coupled that with the world of glam and David Bowie and Roxy Music. People like that?
I didn't hear much Roxy music at the time, actually, sort of weirdly. But yeah, the Bowie and Eno, like the Eno pop records that he made in the mid-70s.
And then sort of So what about yacht rock? We call it yacht rock, but did you like bands like America or the Doobie Brothers or Steely Span? Did you own a Steely Span? Not Steely Dan. God, sorry.
Steely Dan. No, I like Steely Span, but no, when I came back from Tucson and was living in Davis, 12 years old, and started to try to form a band. The guy that lived a block away from me that wanted to play bass, his sister was playing things like the Eagles, and this is early 70s, not like by, when they became the Joe Walsh thing later, but, or Hotel California or whatever, but like early Eagles, sort of that country rock. And I was sort of into that, but it's like I heard America on the radio and things like that, but I didn't really like that sort of thing. And I didn't really like the Steely Dan. I mean, the guitar solos were good, but I wasn't really that into how snotty he sounded, I guess.
Yes, it's just kind of interesting, isn't it? All these little sub-genres or, it's just the way the music evolves, which I do find quite fascinating, really.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's really interesting. Also because, that's like then, like I was saying, by 1979, 1980, I mean, while I was like going to see Rush or something like that, I was also going to the campus to see these bands like Elvis Costello came over, for instance, and the Violent Femmes played and people like that. So it was like completely different sort of musical scenes and musical worlds. Like the big bands that played at the in San Francisco, or Sacramento, you had to drive to go see, Queen. We saw Queen at the Oakland Coliseum, I think.
Right.
And but then meanwhile, back at home in our little town, the more independent bands and the British bands were starting to come over. Sometimes you'd have to go to San Francisco to see something like that. But
and had the sort of people like the Ramones, the Damned, the Sex Pistols, and the Clash, had they all slightly, when that hit, you were at an age where you're just a little bit older than me. Did they sort of hit you? Did they come onto your radar immediately?
But it was a little weird because, like, when the Sex Pistols played at Winterland, I think it was 1978, I considered going, but I had long hair, and I thought, I might get beat up. So I didn't go. I regret that, of course, now, but, I didn't go to see that. But I did see other, like, I remember, this is a funny thing, late 70s, I went to the campus in Davis to see the Talking Heads, and the B-52s opened for them. And I know. And it was just like shocking. It's like, what the hell is this, but everybody was looking around because it was KDVS had sponsored, the radio station in Davis had sponsored the show, and their broadcast range, since Davis is in a valley, the Sierras are on one side and then the coastal range, and then it goes over to San Francisco. So the broadcast range is really huge. So all these people came to this show, and everybody was looking around. Like, some people are dressed like punks, some people are dressed new wave with their skinny ties, some people are hippies, some people are this, that, and everybody's looking around going, oh, is this a new wave show? Oh, is this a punk show? Oh, I didn't realize, So nobody really knew, like in where I was living, nobody really knew what what any of those genres really meant.
Yes.
Or what the culture of it was, I think.
Well, it's interesting because Elvis Costello and then people like Joe Jackson came along, and that was, and I suppose Ian Dury was there as well. And it's sort of like it wasn't quite punk, but it had this certain energy of punk, I suppose. And
sort of an edge, but then real songwriting also.
Amazingly clever. And then, suddenly, like the lyrics were amazing for especially Elvis Costello. And then he does a country and western album. And then you're thinking, well, this guy's a little bit different. And he hasn't run out of ideas after that first album or even second. He's really pumping them out here. And, I saw him live, back in those early days. And it was like, God, he's incredibly intense, and so vicious as well, but quite endearing as well. So then when you got to sort of 1979, you were 16. Do you then stay on at college at that stage? Or do you leave?
I moved in 1981 to Santa Cruz to go to college. And at that point, everything changed for me because of several things. One is that after 2 years there, I started playing with Camper Van Beethoven. So that sort of routed my life in a way. But I was studying music there. Like, I initially went as a philosophy major, and then I sort of tapped out of that after a year because I already tested into the second year of music theory. So I was like, well, I can do a music major in 3 years, not a problem. So then I started studying classical languages instead of philosophy.
Right.
But there, it's like there was simultaneously the punk scene that was happening, like a lot of bands coming up from LA or coming down to San Francisco to play. But then also I stopped listening to rock music for a couple of years because I had to catch up on Western art music and electronic music from the 20th century. So I spent, all of my listening time, like, going back to the Renaissance and then Baroque and then classical. And then, I just had to fill myself up with it to, be an adequate music student, I think.
God, it's quite nice though, isn't it, when you're on a mission to do these things? And
Yeah.
I do remember sort of listening to I think it was Susie Klein and Howard Goodall did, 50 pieces of music, and they were 5-minute bits, but they were just so interesting. Going back to the earliest bit where they could, probably had some, court recording of it, and then sort of coming up to John Cage, and and it was just an interesting education that you have to sort of make notes and study quite diligently.
It wasn't. I mean, David Lowery from Camper Van Beethoven, from Cracker now, was playing in a band called Box of Laughs when I was in the dorms at Santa Cruz. So I would see them, and that was like, wow, they're pretty weird and punky, And then, but then by the time that I started playing with him and Victor and Chris Mola with Camper Van Beethoven, then I started listening to what was happening in independent indie music, what became indie music. Like it probably was not till like 1983 that I heard REM,
right,
and Alex Chilton and things like that. So then it's like, oh, okay, and also because the other music students are like, hey, turning me on to the rock in opposition sort of stuff, like Henry Cow and Chris Cutler and things like that. Have you heard the Art Bears? It's like, oh my God, there's so much music to listen to.
Yes.
And my girlfriend from high school, this is funny also. My girlfriend from high school was, hair dyed blue and black and red or whatever, and, wearing leopard skin tights and a leather jacket. Moved also, she and I both moved to Santa Cruz to go to college there, lived at different colleges, on the university grounds there. And she got a job. One of her side things was being a DJ on the college radio station there, as her name was Violet Violence. So she did a punk rock show. So I was sort of obligated to like listen to that, and keep up with that.
God, when you get into Henry Cow, you have to enjoy the work of King Crimson and Robert Fripp, and it's just an Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It becomes very hard work, doesn't it? Really, and you have those secret desires just to have a 3-minute pop song with a lovely chorus.
Well, I mean, it's like I actually in high school I actually did find the first couple of King Crimson records, and so I liked them. And then they later, What Discipline came out in 1980 or something, I think. So we were still underage, but we bought tickets to both shows that they did in San Francisco, and it was at this hotel bar. And so, we go in and we're like 17 years old or whatever, and we're going to be there for both shows in the evening. And they're like, well, it's a 2-drink minimum per show. So, since you're underage, you have to drink Coca-Colas. So we're just like, I drank 4 Coca-Colas while watching, the Adrian Belew, Tony Levin, Bruford, Robert Fripp, King Crimson, on a stage that was basically, maybe this high, two seats in front of me, or a table in front of me. It was quite amazing. That really blew my mind.
Yeah, so I've seen Adrian up close. Must have been incredible, because he'd only just probably been with David Bowie on one of his tours, actually, just 2 years before. So, yes, incredible times. So then how did you, because 83 is when you joined Camper Van Beethoven, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is a great year of music, because in my world, you'd had the punk, you had post-punk, and obviously there's other bits, but then the Smiths appear and there's a sort of the indie world for 5 years is this. So that was quite an interesting period.
Here's the other thing about this, about starting to play with Camper Van Beethoven, is the guys in the band all came from different musical backgrounds. So while they had been playing together in Southern California during the summer break, and they came back up to Santa Cruz, and then I met Victor, who's the bass player, still, one of my best friends in the world. And he was like a little shaved head, big boot, looked sort of skinheady, but more punk, less skinhead, more sort of punk. And so I was a little like intimidated by him, even though he was like, 18 years old and I was 20. Okay, big deal, But then he was like, you got to come over and listen to some records with me. And he played me things like The Fall and Virgin Prunes and SPK and, just all of this, like Throbbing Gristle, things that I just was like, oh, shit, I've never heard any of this stuff,
God,
So,
yes. A casual evening listening to Throbbing Gristle. That would be...
But
yes,
The
I
Fall,
love it.
it's like, I would never have heard The Fall if not for him.
Yes, quite the musical education. So were you asked to be part of the band, and how did that happen?
Well, they had apparently when they were playing in Redlands during the summer, this guy David McDaniel played violin with them, but he went off to seminary school and became a missionary, I think, like building houses or building towns in other countries. And so they were like, well, we need to get another violin player then, when we get back to college. And so Chris Mola was like, I know this guy who's in one of my classes. And, they saw me carrying my violin across, because I was like, oh, I got to study to play the violin now again, because I'm an actual music student. It's not just electric guitar anymore.
Yes. And what was it like when you first met them and started rehearsing?
It was fun. It was super fun. We were just playing the weirdest stuff, and mashing together and making fun. Like, David wrote a lot of the songs, and they make fun of the dogma of like the punk scene, or the dogma of sort of things like that. So that, like, when we actually started playing shows, it was so funny, because like we'd play sort of ska things, but with like Eastern European type melodies. And, the punk rockers would be like, oh, okay, I guess I can dance to this, but it's sort of weird sounding, But,
yes, it's quite interesting, the violin, isn't it?
yeah.
Who did they have in Hawkwind? Was it Simon House? Was he
Simon
there?
House, yeah.
Yes, God, that was the glory years, really. Oh, and he also toured with David Bowie,
He played with Bowie also, yes.
on the Adrian Belew tour. I think he was in the band at the same time, actually, Simon and Adrian. God, they were awesome, that band. Yes. So then when you got in the band, did you then give up? Were you still studying at the same time, or did you?
Yeah, we were still in school for the first couple of years, I guess. And then I graduated in 1985, and in June of 1985, we put out our first record, like the week that I graduated from school.
Yes, and that was pretty
then
amazing.
we just worked stupid jobs and like would go and play shows when we could. And then in early 1986, we had played some shows with like the Meat Puppets and the Minutemen and people like that. And the booking agency, Venture Booking in New York, was like, okay, I'll tell you what. They called us up and they're like, we'll book you out to New York, and if we like you, we'll book you back. So in early 1986, two things happened. One was, I guess John Peel started playing Take the Skinheads Bowling.
Yes.
So that immediately started like Independent Project Records had put out our first record, and this is Bruce Leicher from Savage Republic. And he put out a lot of records where he had an old 100-year-old letterpress, and he would make like these ornate packages for these records. So our first record came out pressed with like letterpress on cardboard, raw cardboard, and it's really beautiful. But we were like already, making a second record that summer when the first record had come out. And he didn't want to put it out. And so we started talking with the Rough Trade people in San Francisco, and they said, well, we don't want to put it on the Rough Trade label, but if you start your own record company, we'll do distribution and marketing.
Right.
So we did. And so we got our second record out. I think half of it was recorded maybe in the summer and half of it was recorded later that fall. And I think I can't remember, but I think it came out in early 1986 also. So, by the time we went on a national tour, we already had, 2 records.
Yes, God, that's quite amazing. Your prolificness there. So, Independent Project Records brought out the Telephone Freelance Slide
exactly.
Victory, which had the big hit. And obviously, being a John Peel fan, putting in my trusty TDK D90 cassette to record the show, and sure. you listen to all this, and you're thinking, and then suddenly, it could be anything from, I don't know, he played early Public Enemy, or he played the Bundu Boys or the Smiths. There would be like, you'd just hear all this, and then suddenly you go, this is, you'd listen to 90 minutes of a show,
right.
And then there'd be just a couple. And obviously, Take Skinhead's Bowling was just an indie classic straight away, wasn't it? It was just, It caught the imagination. It was also in the Festive 50 of John Peel in 1986, wasn't it? Coming in at 47, apparently. So, yes, it got that sort of traction. And indie kids at that time just loved it, didn't they?
And it allowed us to go over to the UK in 1987, I think, was the first time that we played in several cities: London, Manchester, Sheffield, Glasgow, I think.
Blimey! And did you get a good audience at that time?
Yeah, it was great.
I would imagine so. People, I mean, funny enough, if you're, I don't know, an English indie kid, sort of, in your bedroom, listen to this obscure music, and then, an American band coming over, you just automatically would say, yes, they're brilliant. They're probably my favorite band of all time, just to trying to appear slightly enigmatic and mysterious and cold, like, oh my God, no one else has heard this. I've discovered them.
That's like, when we came back and we're like, oh yeah, I only listen to, television personalities anymore,
I had a friend who said I only listened to the first album when they couldn't play their instruments properly.
For a while.
Yeah, but the second album, I just lost interest. It was too smooth. The production was too tidy. But they was like, but that's the one that had all the good songs on. Yeah, but they'd sold out by then. So, well. I know, it's strange. So you were on Rough Trade for your singles, but then you were on, so you did Picture Tent, Rough Trade. So Picture Tent is your label, but you're licensed to Rough Trade. Right. So Rough Trade is like, it's like having the King, sort of the stamp of like authentic indie. You ticked all the right boxes, didn't you, at that stage?
Yeah, it was lucky. And then the other thing that was really lucky was that Michael Stipe heard the record, and he called. I think he got David's phone number and called him, and David was like, "Who is this really?" He's like, "No, I really like your record. You guys should probably open for us like next year or something."
God,
and we ended up doing that. Like, so we ended up like in 1986. I think it was later 86, doing a tour opening for REM, playing giant places, And, not all of the audience was into it, of course. We had a couple of instances where people were not into the band at all, not like in Camper Van Beethoven. And Michael Stipe had to come out and say, hey, we invited these guys to play, So.
Cool it, as as Mick Jagger would have said at Altamont. Just cool it, man. So did you, on the second, was it the second album, your third one, the 2 and 3? So is that that's
the second album? Yeah,
second album. So you started to contribute much more to this, aren't you? This album.
Yeah.
What was the process like of developing that sort of set of songs?
Well, I mean, we were practicing an awful lot in David's attic, and I guess we just had a lot of songs. I mean, I had been writing songs for a long time, and a lot of songs that I was writing at that time came out later in 1988 on my first solo record, but they weren't things that would really have fit with Camper Van Beethoven. And it's even, some of the songs that I wrote on the second record or the third record are like a little bit outside of what I think the band was trying to do.
Yes.
So then I was like, okay, well then I have to, sort of move off to do that stuff, whatever that is.
Well, you started to take vocals or lead vocals on a couple of tracks as well, didn't you?
Tracks I sang lead, yeah.
What was the intensity like with the band? Because obviously, having done so many of these interviews, a lot of bands have that a 5-year narrative. They get together, the honeymoon period, the single John Peel play, possibly the John Peel session, which was always like, wow, another moment.
Yeah, we did. I think we did a couple of BBC.
Did you?
Yeah, like recording things.
That's nice, isn't it?
Those lovely studios.
Maida Vale.
Maida Vale, yeah.
Yes. Did you get picked up by people like Janice Long as well?
I don't remember, actually. There was another person.
Kid Jensen?
Yeah, might have been that. I just can't remember.
Yes.
God, I had forgotten entirely about that. Yeah.
Yes, the great archive sessions that we have of that time. I because some people are there's one particular person called the Precious Recordings of London who's been sort of getting Janice Long, Kid Jensen and John Peel sessions out and about, actually. So it is quite interesting at that stage. I think Janice Long also did a session with you as well.
It's very possible. I think we did two different sessions.
So you did one which was in 87, two tracks
one in 88 also.
So you had one which had One of These Days, Never Go Back and Photograph.
So that's possibly from 87, actually.
That's right. So there you go. It's it's kind of interesting how this stuff gets mined out, doesn't it? And how it gets released occasionally. So at that stage. And did you play any festivals around? Were you going into Britain
No, not really. I mean, we mostly were doing nightclub shows, even though like the clubs got bigger, of course. Over the course of 87 and 88, but we never did any of the good big festivals. Later, in the late 90s, I was playing with Sparklehorse and we did, Leeds and Reading Festival and things like that. But I had never done that with Camper.
No. And then when did you then when did you part company with the band?
In 1989.
Right. So
we got signed to Virgin Records and we recorded Our Beloved Revolutionary Sweetheart in Los Angeles. And at that time, what was happening in the band was that like David was sort of taking control and he was like the primary mouth to the record company, back and forth. And so the rest of us were just kind of like whatever. And as far as like the songs that I was writing, he didn't really want to play any of those. So the band ended up doing whatever he wanted to do in a way. And then in late 1988, we had done like a month-long tour, national tour in the United States that ended in sometime in November. And then I went to Indonesia, actually, for a month to record Gamelan. And Chris Peterson, the drummer, went to Australia because his wife is Australian. And then when I came back, David came over to my house and he said, I can't play with you anymore. And that was that, basically. The other guys were like, well, we want to keep our job. And then they made Key Lime Pie. And it was like, it was horrible for me. I moved to San Francisco from Santa Cruz and, just like was trying to like figure out what I could do next, and the music that I was doing was obviously not the same kind of stuff as that. And nobody was really interested in the sort of weird East Bay prog sort of weirdness that I was doing.
No.
Guitar-wise. And then our lawyer, Barry Simons, who was the lawyer that had worked with us getting signed, I went to visit him because he was like, well, I'll see if I can shop around something for you. And I saw that he had the cassette of Key Lime Pie, and I had not heard it. And so I was like, can I take this? And I put it in my car, the stereo, as I drove home. and he had listened to one side of it, and so it started on side 2 with the song June, and I just I started listening to it, and I was just like, oh my God, it's so good. And I pulled over and I just sat there and listened to it, and I was just like, shit, this is the record that I had always wanted to make with the band, and I wasn't in the band, so it was heart-wrenching, and it sounded great. Like everything that I hated, that I argued with the producer about, Our Beloved, the stupid digital reverbs on the snare drum, the violin with the Madonna plus and minus several cents pitch shifting thing, so it's all buzzy, and all that stuff was not there, and it was like really dry and really direct. I was just like, oh shit,
Oh God.
That was hard. And so then I wrote David a letter, saying, God, I think this is the best stuff, the best songs you've ever written, the best stuff, whatever. Meanwhile, the rest of the guys were touring, for Key Lime Pie, and the band broke up on tour when they were touring for it, because they just couldn't handle each other anymore.
Right.
And so when David came home finally, after abandoning the band in Europe, and he went on walkabout in Morocco and all sorts of things, and when he came home, I guess, to get my letter, he thought I was being, I was like jabbing at him or something, or being ironic perhaps, like teasing him. So we didn't speak for, I don't know, 8 years or something like that.
Oh my God, that is so tricky, isn't it? I know, it's weird, isn't it? You would have thought, yes, it kind of was it just one of those bands that just everything was, because I did an interview with a member of James, and I remember the guitarist saying they were, at the height of their kind of commercial power in the 90s, and they were sitting around a hotel in Spain, and one of them just said, why don't we break up? We just really hate each other. And they went, can we just
oh my God.
Can we stop now? That kind of feeling.
You're essentially married to like these 4 other guys, and you live with them all the time. And it's like, if there's something that bothers you about it, it's like, something bothers you about the other guy. There was a great quote from, I think that David told me, from Bob Roop, who had played bass with Cracker, who was like really bothered by somebody else. I can't remember who it was, but he was just like looking at the guy, narrow-eyed, and the guy's like getting a burrito to eat or something like that, and he's like, he's gonna eat that whole burrito. Like that was the worst possible thing that this person could do, but it's just like, I hate him for that.
Yes, it kind of can, I just know those moments where someone's response, I knew you were going to say that, it's really tedious, or those moments where you just think, God.
Also, you have to understand, it's like, in 1989, 1990, I was 26 years old. And it's like, you're young, you don't know shit, and it's like, all I'd been doing was playing rock music, since getting out of college. And we were full of ourselves. We were all full of ourselves.
Yes, it was just all up. Did that musical shift change have quite an impact? Because I know when the Smiths broke up in 87, then there's the next wave of like 16, 18-year-olds come along in the ecstasy world, and then you get that dance scene, from Manchester with the Happy Mondays and Soup Dragons and Primal Scream, and then Seattle comes over with, Bleach.
The grunge stuff.
Yeah, and the grunge scene starts to happen, and it's like, oh, there's a new kind of musical movement. And we had sort of those other bands which were like a bit shoegazy, like My Bloody Valentine, and then you had indie bands like the Sundays. But just generally music had shifted. Did you, as an artist, feel a bit like, God, how do you cope with the next decade?
What was weird was, I moved up to San Francisco in 1989. I lived there until 1997, I think. So in San Francisco, the music scene was obviously quite a bit different than it was in Santa Cruz. But I was playing, I started to look for people to play the music that I had written for the first solo record that I did, which was called Storytelling, which came out in 1988, right before I got kicked out of the band.
Right.
Whoa, what a great, it's like a double album. It's really proggy and weird and ornate and, got lots of overdubs and odd time signatures and very difficult, to try to like start a career on. That's for sure. Like a solo career. But, I found musicians from the Berkeley, Oakland world that were really, there was a lot of bands from there that were doing more sort of rock in opposition type stuff, like obviously influenced by Frith and if not Henry Cow, then Skeleton Crew and things like that, and a lot more sort of open stuff. So I ended up playing with my band called Hieronymus Firebrain for about 4 years, and that was good. It's great music. I mean, it's really interesting, but it's like you never went anywhere. We played, in California only, and I started bartending, and so it's like I was bartending and playing music with Hieronymus Firebrain with a band called Dieselhed in San Francisco, where I just played fiddle, and they were great band, two great songwriters, great singers that had harmony stuff, and a lot of interesting musicians in that band, and then a band called Grand Falloon Bus, and then I also had a band with like other ex-80s, San Francisco musicians. It was called Sideways. Sideways never put out a record. We just play at bars and drink. That was all we did. And,
right. And how did your solo album Storytelling, because it's a hell of an ambitious project, did it have any traction at all? Has it picked up cult status decades later?
Definitely. It's like if you look at streaming or whatever statistics, those songs are the most played of anything that I have ever done, I think.
Yes, I would imagine people are going to one day, there's various magazines in this country which, concentrate on the obscure artists and bands. I would imagine one day someone will do a massive 6-page spread about that album and
really weird.
Analyze every track to death and see. Yeah. God, if you haven't heard this, you're probably not really interested in music. Yeah. No pressure to you guys out there. They love to sort of get the most obscure, don't they? So so when that came out, were you kind of, because it's a hell of a project, were you kind of absolutely shattered at that point, thinking?
Yes, I was just dead. I mean, I didn't understand what I was going to do at all, And
had you sort of thought, God, I'm going slightly mad? This is what crazy artists do.
Yeah, exactly. And then David formed Cracker, and Cracker then had hits with Low and Teen Angst and things like that. And then Victor and Greg and Chris Peterson and David Immergluck, who had ended up playing in Camper after I left, who was someone we knew from Santa Cruz from the university. Started playing with the Monks of Doom, and they were, touring, and so it's like all of the people that I had been in bands with were successful, and here I was like at home, and so we'd have the I can't remember which one was in San Francisco. It wasn't CMJ. It was another one of the college music journal sort of festivals, where it's like all the college rock bands are going to come into town. And so I would go down like when these guys were playing, and I'd stand like outside the club or across the street and play songs on the sidewalk,
Oh my God, that's so heartbreaking.
Wow.
But hard, that's quite as... Yes, dealing with that. And then you meet, is it Eugene Chadbourne?
Yeah. Chadbourne, we started playing with Chadbourne when we were still in Santa Cruz. So we made the first Camper Van Chadbourne record at the studio that Camper recorded that up in the mountains there in 1987, maybe, or possibly 88, but I think it was 87. And we made a couple of records with him, and we ended up playing, it was like Victor, Chris Peterson, and I, who ended up playing with Chadbourne. David and Greg were not really that interested in it.
Right.
And so we ended up playing with Chadbourne a lot, and we roped in some of our jazz buddies from Santa Cruz and San Francisco. And so we ended up playing in like New York and then doing a tour in Europe in 91, I think. Yeah. Yeah. It was right when they started the Gulf War in Kuwait.
Right.
And we flew over, and all of these American bands that were supposed to be playing all over Germany and everything had canceled because they were afraid of flying. We didn't realize, we were just that dumb. So, we went over and we had huge audiences because we were like the only rock band playing that, whatever.
Yes.
And we played all American like protest music, country music, rock music, jazz, all different kinds of stuff, all mishmash. Because Chadbourne, he can just do whatever, and it's just like if it gets crazy, the distortion pedals go on and it goes completely nuts. So.
And how did the album Revenge of Camper Van Chadbourne, how did that go down?
It's weird. I think it's maybe divisive in the camper fan world. Like, I think there's a certain number of people who are like, yeah, that's cool, that's really weird shit, and then there's a certain number of people who are like, that is not good. It is not interesting to us. So
yes,
so it's like it is sort of, that stuff is sort of divisive. But we've made several records with him. Like, we made that one, the Camper Van Chadbourne one, and then one called the Eddie Chatterbox Double Trio Love album, which was half Tim Buckley covers. And then we made one that was a live record from the Knitting Factory in New York. And then later in the 90s, Victor and I played acoustic with him and made a couple of records that were mostly just acoustic recordings.
God, that's just there's a lot to discover here, isn't there?
I know. Well, I mean, it's like every time I play on a record, I try and put it in the list that's on my website. And it's like, I don't even know how many damn records there are now.
Yes. So how did, because the 90s musically, starts to get sort of into all those, Soundgarden, Marilyn Manson, sort of Red Hot Chili Peppers. What's it like, trying to navigate your own musical and creative career when sort of the mainstream charts is going from bad to worse, and then ends with Woodstock 99, which is... Yeah. It's just like, it's a perfect way to say, look, enough. It's not been good. It's a terrible decade, really. Yeah. So how do you deal with that?
Well, for the first 5 years of the 90s, I was a bartender in San Francisco. So I was basically riding around drunkenly on my motorcycle, going from gig to gig, sitting in with bands or playing with my own bands or bartending. So it was... it was like sort of its own little world in San Francisco. Hardly ever got out of that area. And San Francisco sort of had its own music scene, and there were a lot of, people would come to see the bands, and the bands never expected that they would go beyond that. And we had great record stores. So I was turned on to a lot of great, I saw like PJ Harvey when she first came over to play in 1992, and was just like, yes, you did it right, sort of thing. And then, the next time she came back, she's playing at the Warfield Theater for 3,000 people or something. So it's, going from a bar to giantness like that. And then in the bar, when I was bartending, of course, then we'd have to stock the jukebox with whatever was popular. And it was like some things that I was just like, most of it is crap. But then something will, like My Bloody Valentine, for instance. And it's like, I'm like at work, and then suddenly somebody puts on a My Bloody Valentine song, and it's like, wait, what is this? What's happening? Have to listen to this.
Yes. And did the Grateful Dead come into your world at all at this stage?
The Grateful Dead, well, actually, this is a very funny story. I really did dislike Grateful Dead at this time. Right now, I really like the Grateful Dead, but only from about like 1969 to 73 or 74. But I really like it, and I really like Jerry Garcia's guitar playing and Phil Lesh's bass playing. It's unbelievable to me that they were able to do what they did. But back then, I hated them so much. And I had gone to see them a few times. Like, this is the best story. When I was in high school in Davis, I was playing in my punk rock band called Burnt Toast that played the hard rock, and then we'd make up our own songs that were like, why is this the American dream when it seems like a nightmare to me, and this sort of stuff, whatever. And so I'm playing in that band, and this other piano player that I knew came up and said, hey, you play guitar, can you play bass? And I was like, oh yeah, of course. I never really played bass, but it's like, well, I'm playing with these older guys, and they need a bass player. So I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up playing with this band. I don't even remember what it was called now, but it was dudes that were probably 10 years older than me. So probably like late 20s. And, the singer was a guy with like a mustache. He'd croon out. We'd play like, if a picture paints 1,000 words, then why can't I paint you? And Tuesday's Gone by Lynyrd Skynyrd and all this sort of stuff. And then he would take a break, probably to snort coke or something like that. And then the guitar players would be like, let's do Sugar Magnolia. So they started teaching me all these Grateful Dead songs, and I had no concept of this band. So I was, I learned all these songs, and we'd play them when the singer was on a break when we were doing a gig or something like that. And then in 1980, they were like, oh, the Dead are playing in San Francisco for 2 weeks at the Warfield Theater. We're going to so we can't have any rehearsals or anything like that. And we're like, oh, that's cool. And they're like, have you ever seen them? It's like, no. And so they gave me and the piano player a pair of tickets, and we went to this one show, and we were like, sat down, in like the fourth row or something like that. And they came out and they did an acoustic set, and we're like, well, that was okay. It's not what I expected at all. It's like really clean, sort of acoustic, slow music, but nobody seems to be leaving after the set. They're still like hanging out. So maybe they're going to do another set, and then they came back out, did an electric set, and it was like, oh, now I can like watch the bass player and see what he's actually doing in some of these songs that I was trying to learn. And, at this time, Jerry Garcia was like playing with like really clean hi-fi amplifier. So it was like really piercing guitar tones. And I was like really not into that at the time. And then again, after this set, nobody left. And so we're like, wow, really get your money's worth with this band. So they did a third set and everything. And I was like, well, it was okay. It wasn't that great. And I moved down to Santa Cruz to go to the university, and all these kids down there are hippies into the Grateful Dead. So I ended up going to a few Grateful Dead concerts with friends of mine from the dorms. They were terrible, like with, Joan Baez, and there's just like slow, draggy, horrendous stuff. And so I was just like, this band is awful. I just hate this. I hate this crap. And then later, I actually went back to one show that they did in 1989 or 90 down the peninsula from San Francisco, because some friend of mine was working for, I think, Rhino Records, and they were putting out Mickey Hart's Rhythm Devils or something. And she's like, hey, you want to go to the show? Let's go. And again, it was like, I thought it was awful, except for the part where they played amplified garage door springs and did this whole noisy, spacey, weird part. And I was like, that was actually pretty cool. Like, as far as the songs, I hated them at the time. And it was only like later that I started actually going back earlier and listening to what they had been doing, like when they first came out, and thought, oh, that's actually really good stuff.
Yes, well, I think I just saw the film. Was it called A Long Strange Trip?
Oh yeah,
which was out on, and I love my rock documentaries, so I'm happy to sort of sit there and sort of also try and understand the appeal, because I had a boss who was obsessed with them. So I suppose I got American Beauty and Working Man's Dead, and I thought, well, this is okay. I don't quite understand where that goes to this like, religious experience. I didn't quite understand that. But
the arena of deadheads and the whole parking lot of drug selling and whatever they were doing out there, that must have been, I mean, it's so bizarre. That documentary, that was, I saw that, I think at the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was like shut up. And that was when two things. One is that I saw that documentary, and also I thought, I'm going to listen to every version of Dark Star.
Right, that was very ambitious.
So I did. And, it's like 200 something versions. And I wrote like a little analysis of each one, put it on my blog. It's like, it's ridiculous. 10,000 words nobody ever wants to read, but, whatever. I did it, And, but during the process of that, this was a pandemic project, that took like 3 years or something. But during the process of that, I started listening to the Grateful Dead from like 1968, 69, and was like, oh, they were actually really like pushing it out. They were rocking out. It was really cool. And then they went and did that the American Beauty, Working Man's Dead sort of stuff. And actually, I don't really like that very much. I don't really like that Americana. I like more of the absolute weirdness, freak out jam stuff. And so when they started doing that again in like 72, 73, they really got jazzy and their playing was really good. Like as musicians, I think that for me is like the height of what they are able.
Yes, well, it's a Dark Star. No, I remember. Yes, that would be. You must have gone slightly bonkers listening to that.
Yeah. I mean, what else are you going to do? I mean, it's like you got to, find some projects.
Yes. So then, as that the 90s, and obviously Jerry Garcia dies about 95,
Yeah,
doesn't
95.
he?
Yeah.
So there was him. Then, so how do you then sort of get into the millennium and the next period? Is this where you team up with Sparklehorse?
Yeah, I left. Well, for one thing, I stopped drinking for about 10 years because I was just killing myself. In San Francisco, I was I was riding a motorcycle and drinking all the time. So it was like, that was a fairly dangerous profession.
Yes, this is not good.
So I stopped bartending and I just cooled it out for a while. I worked in a record store for a little bit, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and I worked doing film sound editing and film sound like sound effects and things like that, and played with sat in with a few bands down there, and then David Lowery called me and said, hey, I was recording my friend Mark Linkus, and he needs someone to play with for this band. You want to do it? And I was like, sure. And so I called Mark Linkus on the phone, and he was like, yeah, well, just come out to Virginia and we'll rehearse for a little bit, and then we'll go play a few shows, and then, we'll see what happens. So this is like middle of 1998, I guess, when Good Morning Spider came out.
Right.
And so I went out there to Virginia to his farm, where he had his little recording studio and his house and everything, and the horses and motorcycles and stuff like that. He was also into the fact that I rode a Moto Guzzi, and he was really into Moto Guzzis. So I go out there and we're rehearsing, and this like Dutch film crew comes to do a documentary about us. Or about him, really. And, and I'm just like, wow, what is this? I didn't realize that he was like, in this peer group of, all these other people. And then we went over to London to play like, I don't know, 4 shows or something like this. And the first show is at fucking Shepherd's Bush. And I'm just like, oh shit, so. It was insane. So then I was like, okay, well, yeah, that was cool. And then he's like, well, in a month we are going to do a tour, in Europe and England and then come back and then States and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I'm up for this. So I spent about a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years, I guess.
Yes. And what was Mark like as a person to be with?
Mark was a very funny cat. He was very soft-spoken, really beautiful, caring individual. But, this is right after he had done his passing out in London and nearly dying and going to and being revived from having he passed out, I guess, with his legs folded up underneath him, and it created a potassium block. So when the EMTs came and they stretched out his legs, the potassium went to his heart and stopped his heart. So he died for a period of time. And so after this, he had some leg issues. because like his calf muscles had atrophied, so he had to he sort of hobbled around a little bit after he was in a wheelchair for a little bit, and so he was really sort of slower and thoughtful about things. But he was so funny because it's like in the entire time that we were touring, I don't think I ever saw him drink water. I only ever saw him drink Coca-Cola or whiskey,
Right,
or coffee. And it's like, I don't know how people like this stay alive. It's like, how do you do it? And smoking cigarettes, drinking Coca-Cola and coffee and whiskey.
blimey! But it's such a big cult artist at that stage as well.
And so playing in the UK, and here's like dudes from Radiohead, hanging out with us in the bus, or we're playing in Oxford at their club, at the Zodiac, I think it's called.
Yes.
And and Tom York is like, "Oh, that was a great guitar solo you did. I can't believe it." It's like, "Oh shit."
Yes.
So it was a really intense experience. It was like a peer group of people that was, I had never expected to rub elbows with at all. PJ Harvey and Radiohead and Cardigans and all these sorts of bands that were popular at the time.
Yes, that was the real moment, wasn't it? Another chapter in our little musical moment. And what was it like being with David again? Was that quite a nice experience?
It was when the time that, well, several things precipitated us playing together again. One was Sparklehorse was playing in Los Angeles at the Troubadour, and David was there, and so he came on and we played, I think, All Her Favorite Fruit, and which is weird because it's like it was a song that I had played on for the demos when we were writing it, but then I wasn't on the record, and so they got someone else to record violin stuff on it. And so this is the first time, that was the first time that I'd ever actually played the song live.
Right.
And it was with Sparklehorse. It was very, very weird. And
Yes.
and so that was, but then David suggested that Victor and Greg and I join Cracker to come out and do a set of Camper within the Cracker show. And we started doing that in 2000 and 2001. And in 2002, I think, was when Camper Van Beethoven per se started playing again as ourselves. Oh, I know what happened. David had a studio in Richmond, Virginia that Mark had also recorded at. We had recorded, Sparklehorse had recorded some stuff there. Anything that I ever recorded with Sparklehorse is either from that or from BBC sessions, none of which is released, I think. I think it's all in archives somewhere.
Right. Blimey.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a lot still to be archived and released, really, isn't there?
But, so then David was like, "Why don't you and Victor come out and I think Greg also to Sound of Music over after the Christmas break or something, and we'll work on making another record." And we made this record that's called Camper Van Beethoven is Dead.
Blimey, there you go. And did it feel nice to be back with the group?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it was actually one of the things that really solidified that feeling was in 2002 when we got Chris Peterson back drumming, and we went into rehearsals in New York to play the first Camper Van Beethoven shows since 1990, I guess. Or
yes.
And so we went into the rehearsal room and started playing, and I just felt like, oh, this is how I learned how to play music with people, was with these guys. It's like I know what they're going to do. I know how they're going to do it. I don't even need to think about, do I know the notes to the song? It's like it's all here already.
Yes.
It was a really interesting feeling. It's this is how I how I know how to do this.
So you did an album called Camper Van Beethoven's Dead?
Yeah. In 2000.
In 2000.
It was like odds and ends, scraps, things we put together, a lot of stuff that we just put together right there in the studio.
And then did you make a commitment to say, yes, the band, we have returned?
It took a couple of years still. It wasn't until 2002 that we started, playing as the band again. And then we made New Roman Times in 2004. And so then
what was the Tusk project then?
Oh, that was about that same time too, wasn't it? That was something. that was a big joke, because we were like, well, we should work on another record, but what kind of record can we do? And I was like, why don't we do a cover of all of Tusk? Because I had always wanted to do that. It's like I just thought it was the best record because it's like it's so messed up. It's like there's some songs that are so meticulous, and like every Stevie Nicks song has a different kind of reverb for her vocals, a different kind of thing. And then there's like Lindsey Buckingham's home demos, basically, where it's like recorded in his bathroom or something, and it's like they're great songs.
How long did that take to record that project?
A week.
Right.
And
so who got to do like this? There's Sarah, Sisters of the Moon, isn't there? Beautiful Child.
Victor got to sing those ones. I sang some of the Lindsay ones. David sang some of the Christine McVie and Buckingham ones.
It's a great album. It's a difficult one, but it's also quite intriguing It's
beautiful. I think it's great. But I also think that the Camper Van Beethoven version of the record, we put a jackalope on the cover instead of the dog biting. Jackalope biting a foot with a Birkenstock sandal on it instead of the dog biting, And I think the Camper version is really good. I think it stands up as as a record. It's really good. It's very weird.
Yes.
And, I did a whole like music concrete collage for the middle part of Tusk. Instead of like going off into the drum stuff, I did this whole electronic music thing for it. And then we told people that we had recorded it in 1987 when Chris Peterson had broken his leg skiing. And so we had to use a drum machine. And what's funny about that is that the Lynn drum machine and the Lynn drum machine that we used for the record that was made in the 1980s was, not the Lynn drum machine, the EMU, the emulator, was made in Scotts Valley right by Santa Cruz. And Chris Peterson had actually recorded the drum samples for it. So it was actually his drums on the emulator.
Fantastic.
So we told everybody that we had done this in 1987, cooped up in a cabin while we couldn't do anything else. And we sent it. We just lied completely to the press about it and said it was like, 15 years old and all this sort of stuff. And we also, this is the best, also white labeled a copy to Spin and some other magazines saying that it was a Strokes side project. Like with no information on it.
Excellent. God, that is fantastic. I like the style. It's very good. So what did the atmosphere in the band at this stage then feel like you were going to take this kind of more sort of as a committed project going forward?
We were all working and doing things at the same time, but it was like Camper was a band from like 2004 until 2019, and we got better. I would say, like, we made the two records that we made in 2011 and 2013. Not very many people know about them, La Costa Perdida and El Camino Real, but they're really good. I mean, I think they're really good. And the band was really playing well by the time that the pandemic hit and we basically stopped touring.
Yes, so, and how come you then sort of relocate? How did this kind of move happen? Because this is quite a massive moment, isn't it?
You mean?
Yes.
Okay, so Camper was playing. I went back to school. I went to graduate school in the early 2000s at Mills College and got my master's degree. I was Fred Frith's assistant for the Contemporary Performance Ensemble.
Right.
And so I got a master's degree, and then I started teaching music theory at the College of Marin and desktop musicianship, which is to say computer music, there and at Ohlone College in Fremont. and working so that was like 2 days of teaching and then working at a used bookstore in San Francisco, and it was great. And my wife uh, is Swedish, and so we were living in Oakland, California, and had a house, and then this so I was working those jobs and touring with Camper whenever we would tour, which was not all that much, but enough to keep the band alive and working, and playing my own stuff, of course, doing my own records and whatnot of all different kinds. I have so many like rock records and electronic music records and whatever. But then what happened was in 2008 there was that financial crisis of some sort.
Oh yes.
And with the housing business, and I was working at the College of Marin, and then they let go of all of the people that weren't fully full time and weren't tenured, and so not having a job. And this is weird because, like, I found this out when we came over to Sweden for the summer, and so the following year this is 2009, I guess. When I got back, I was desperately looking for a job, and so I got a job with Pandora, which is like a streaming service like Spotify, and that was a 9 to 5 office job, which like I could sometimes take the computer on tour and like work in the car while we're driving, like, oh God, working in a backseat of a car on a computer, which was just painful. And, and then you get back and it's like, it's a music company, right? And so all these like tech guys are like, dude, that was cool being on tour, living the dream. And it's like, oh yeah, living the dream, getting car sick in the back of the car, trying to type on your computer. But then I realized that like there was a lot of really shady stuff that was going on. Like they were accepting ads from like homophobic hate groups and pro right-wing stuff that they were serving to college students, and they were doing all of this geolocating people to serve ads and not telling them that they were like tracking their phones, that sort of stuff. And so I would bring this stuff up at meetings, like, why are we doing this? Can we like just have the advertising department be more careful about like what sort of stuff they're selling to or that sort of thing. And then they fired me. So when they fired me was in like April of 2012, and we had a 1-year-old daughter and no money, and we're like, I guess that's it. So we moved here.
Right. And you went.
So we lost the house. We couldn't pay for the house. The Bank of America had taken the loan or bought the loan from, I don't know, one of the shyster companies that was financing our house or whatever, and they would not give us a break. I was like, well, can we work something out? And they're like, no, you have to give us the house.
Wow, Christ, that's a hard one to deal with, actually.
Yeah. So we moved here, and I've been living here for 13 years now.
Sweden, sorry, God, that's a terrible mistake.
I'm in Stockholm.
Yes. So then do you land there with family and a few suitcases, or were you able to ship all your stuff?
No, I shipped all my instruments and books.
My God, that's did that feel like the most massive adventure in your life?
I mean, it's like how I said I had moved to Los Angeles in the 90s? That was a horrible experience of like packing everything up, putting it into a van and driving it down. And then, 3 years later, moving back up to the Bay Area. And I was like, I never want to move again. So, it was like I'd settled and put all my money down on a house because as a, musician or a music teacher, it's like the only way that you can get a mortgage was like by giving a big down payment, so I did that, and then that was all the money, and it was in the house, so it's all gone now.
Christ.
Yeah, but I mean, Sweden is Sweden, and so it's like I'm not worried about like being homeless here or something like that.
No. Has it taken you a while to adjust to the cultural change?
I'm not that big a fan of Swedish culture. I mean, it's like I like the folk culture, like I like the folk music, but the popular music culture here is really not cool. I think and especially in Stockholm, like in Gothenburg and Malmo, I think it's much better. But in Stockholm, it's like the music culture here is really commercial, and it's really organized around like that sort of, if something is popular, then it's good, and so the underground scene has just been dying here. Like, especially since the pandemic, a lot of the clubs, smaller places have closed, and it's just, bands that are good here end up playing in Germany,
Right.
or in Denmark, or something like that.
My God! But then you obviously your solo work is phenomenally prolific at this stage, isn't it?
Yeah, and I had one of my records actually came out on a London label on Floating World Records in about 7 years ago, I guess.
Right.
Called Superfluity.
Okay.
And that took me a couple of years to make here. And during that process, I met Matthias Olsson. And Matthias Olsson, I play with all the time now. And he runs a studio called Roth Händel. And he had played with Englagård, which was like a prog rock band in the 90s, and then with Pine Forest Crunch, which was, sort of pop rock girl singer stuff in the early 2000s, really popular in Japan, that's, sort of stuff. And he runs a studio and he produces tons of music and plays drums and plays anything. And so he and I play together all the time. We're playing tomorrow night, in fact.
Right.
At Larry's Corner.
That's amazing. And then sort of during the pandemic, how do you navigate that period?
Mostly it was difficult. That was a really tough time for me. I got really depressed because it's like I stopped touring in the States. Camper was nothing anymore. I had been going, even after moving here, Camper did like 5 or 6 weeks in December, January in the States, West Coast and East Coast. And then also in the summer, going into September, when we had a festival that we used to do in Joshua Tree, or outside of Joshua Tree, called the Camp Out. And so it was like I was in the States touring for probably like 2 months, 3 months a year.
Yes.
And up until January of 2020. And then we played the shows, and then I came back here in February. Went over to Finland to play a couple of solo shows, and then that was it. Nobody went anywhere after that. It was like, bang. So, I made a cassette tape. It took me a couple of years to finish it there, called Shitty Nuggets. And it's like all these songs that I just made, like, I had like one idea for a song, make it. With a drum machine and stuff like that. And it ended up being like a giant, 90-minute C90. So it's
right.
It's a cassette.
God, well, it's got a look.
Here, it's a cassette. See?
There you go. Right.
I just put these records out here so I could remember to bring them to the show tomorrow night to sell them. Here's what Superfluity looks like.
Fantastic. Nice one. So then with the band then, has Camper Van Beethoven now found its niche in life? Has it sort of got a place in sort of the live circuit?
Not yet. Again, we played our first shows in 5 years last month. We did 2 nights at the Fillmore in San Francisco. And it was like, I started practicing in January because I was like, oh man, I haven't played a lot of this stuff for 5 years, and we were playing the first album, Telephone Free Landslide Victory. And it's like, I don't even play violin like that anymore. It's like super fast, a lot of it. And then we went to San Francisco in April, and we rehearsed for 4 days, like, all day long sort of thing. And then did these 2 shows, and they were phenomenal. It was great. It felt good. The band was good. All the musicians are good. Everybody plays still. So
yes. So
now we have more shows coming up. In July, I have to fly a lot. And then in September, we're flying all over the place, like doing, we're going to do our festival again out by Joshua Tree. But then also we're playing in like Washington, D.C., Athens, Georgia, Chicago. I can't remember maybe something else. I can't remember.
Right. Yes, you got
So
Chicago.
coming up, I have like a lot of Camper Van Beethoven to do.
So that's September, and then you got this festival in July, haven't you?
Oh yeah, there's two in July. There's the Winnipeg Folk Festival in Canada, and then Petaluma Music Festival in California.
My God. And then sort of going forward then, what's on the agenda for sort of the end, well, after September and into next winter and next year?
To be honest, I have no idea. I don't know if it can hold together. And I don't mean just because of the, because of tensions with the people. Actually, we're all pretty, we're all old now. We're all 60 or something, so it's like, God damn, might as well just do what you can do,
Yes, this is true.
But I think it's more of a financial burden at this point. Like, I don't think that Camper Van Beethoven can make enough money to sustain itself anymore. Like, the music business changed a lot in the last 5 years. And it's like where we could have, done a tour filling 500 person places and come away with money from that. I don't think that that's possible anymore. Like, the cost of transportation, the cost of, how much money is taken, how much it costs to rent places, how much people charge for tickets versus what people buy. I've heard a lot of these stories about bands being pushed to play bigger and bigger places because more people make money off them, but they don't get the audiences to come to those shows.
Right. Yes.
I don't know what will happen. I mean, we'll see. We may end up doing some stuff like we used to after Christmas, going to the States. But I mean, the last time we played in England was 2013, I think.
Right. Yes, it's strange that hasn't, that you haven't sort of done a European English or British tour at all.
I know.
It would be, what was it? Yeah. So, yeah.
And honestly, it's like I had thought that, like, now was prior to everything shutting down in 2020, I was like, we really should market ourselves to the festival circuit in the UK for summer times, because I think it would be great to, Take the Skinheads Bowling was a big thing. So it's like we can still do, probably get enough attention to do that sort of thing. But
yes.
it never happened.
And have you sort of got all your work archived and beautifully packaged? Is it all sort of nicely compiled now?
I believe so. I went through a lot of the archives recently because last fall we decided to re-up our contract with Cooking Vinyl to put out all of the music again. And they just re-released Telephone Free Landslide Victory in April for Record Store Day.
Right.
And so the other records are going to come out, but there's not much like I mean, there is, I guess there's maybe some of the stuff from the BBC stuff, but I think that they actually erased a lot of those tapes.
Right. Yeah, they might have done. It's interesting talking to this guy who's Nick from Precious Recordings of London, because I asked him the process, and he just said you just had to go and pay the fee and then sort of do the packaging. And yes, you're not going to sell a lot, but there's people who are quite excited to hear a good version of those sessions from 30 or 40 years ago. So it is kind of...
There's not that much that hasn't been released. I mean, because in the initial re-releases of a lot of the early Camper records, we dug up whatever we had. And so I don't think there's much that's unreleased at this point.
Yes. And what would you say is your favourite, if you were to recommend that album to somebody who had never come across the band before? Which was your most fondest record?
It's hard to say because all of the albums are very different, and also inside of it, so it's harder to get an objective viewpoint. I would say maybe the third record, just because it has a wide variety of things, and it's still independent. It's on Pitch a Tent, or it came out on Pitch a Tent originally, and so it was still very like sort of striving in all of these different directions at once, sort of thing, before we were having to do things for Virgin Records that were like, this is a song. It goes like
Right. Yes. It's always a bit difficult when you have to compromise yourself. And on the solo albums, because there's a lot,
yeah.
would you go for storytelling?
No, actually not. I would say listen to All Attractions, actually, or Honey from like 2008, 2012.
Right.
That would give you a better idea of like the sort of songs that I write, I think.
Honey. Yes. Well, we'll definitely check that out, actually. It's all there on streaming, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's all there. Yeah.
Yes.
And
And
right, well, I got to get going actually because it's 10:30.
Yes, it's late. It's late. Okay, well, look, Jonathan, thank you ever so much for this. This has been amazing. It is a bit late for you, but yeah, thank you for your time and insight into the musical moments of your life. But yes, and if you want, I can always send you a copy of the show interviews.
Yeah, do.
I will. Okay. Good night.
All right. Good night. Thank you very much. This was fun.
Thanks a lot. Take care. See you later. Bye. Bye. And that, dear listener, as you gather, is the end of the interview with Jonathan from Camper Van Beethoven. This has been the C86 show, David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and all those other social media platform sites. And all these shows have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.